Every future is built twice, first in the mind, then in reality. The tragedy for most people is that they allow the world to build their future for them, instead of designing it with intention. The result is a life dictated by chance, convenience, and circumstance. But those who take the time to plan, to think, and to design their own direction rarely end up surprised by where they arrive. They may face storms, setbacks, delays, or detours, but they do not drift. They build. In this audiobook, we will explore the rare and often overlooked truth that the future is not a mystery to unlock, but a project to construct. Success, fulfillment, and personal growth do not emerge by accident. They emerge through clarity of identity, well-structured plans, systems that make progress sustainable, and habits that compound over time. Most importantly, they emerge through the courage to take responsibility for where you are and where you are going. In this audiobook, we will outline how to envision the future you truly want, transform that vision into practical milestones, and engineer the daily actions that make the future inevitable. We will explore how to think long-term, how to build resilience, how to choose the right people to bring into your plan, and how to design a version of yourself capable of sustaining the outcomes you desire. This is not about wishful thinking. It is about deliberate construction. If you've ever felt that your life could be more purposeful, more directed, and more aligned with who you want to become, you are in the right place. Designing your future is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, and it is a skill you can learn. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop living by accident and start living by design. Most people don't consciously choose the life they end up living. They simply wake up, follow the routine that was handed to them, respond to whatever is loudest or most urgent, and hope things eventually work out. It's a life that runs on autopilot, a life shaped by other people's expectations, other people's plans, and other people's priorities. And while it might seem normal, perhaps even harmless, living by accident slowly steals your future. You drift, you wait, you delay, and years go by without realizing where they went or how they disappeared so quietly. Living by accident isn't just a lack of planning, it's a lack of ownership. It's accepting the default option, the easy route, the path of least resistance. It's letting life decide for you. And when life decides for you, it rarely chooses what's best. It chooses what's convenient, what's immediate, what's familiar. It chooses what requires the least amount of effort. But living on autopilot never leads to a future you're proud of. It leads to a future you have to explain. Living by design, on the other hand, begins with a powerful and sometimes uncomfortable question. What do I actually want my future to look like? Not what your parents want, not what your friends or co-workers expect, not what society declares is impressive, but what you, deep down, truly want to build. That question alone changes everything, because the moment you define your direction, you become harder to move, harder to distract, and harder to influence. You begin to live deliberately, instead of reactively. Living by design means you don't wait for clarity, you create clarity. You don't wait for opportunity, you prepare for opportunity. You don't wait to feel ready, you move and adjust as you go. And yes, at times you will feel uncertain, unprepared, or even afraid. But those feelings are not signs to stop. They are signs that you are no longer drifting, you are steering. And steering, your life takes energy. It requires focus, it demands awareness. But it also gives you something that drifting never can: direction. When you have direction, life doesn't feel random anymore. You know why you are doing what you are doing. You know what matters and what doesn't. You know what to say yes to, and more importantly, what to say no to. This is the beginning of designing your future. You stop hoping and start planning. You stop reacting and start deciding. You stop guessing and start aiming. And when you begin aiming, even small steps move you somewhere meaningful. Direction is more powerful than speed, because speed without direction just gets you lost faster. So ask yourself, are you living by accident or living by design? One path leaves your future up to chance. The other puts your future in your hands. The moment you choose design over accident, the future stops being a mystery. It becomes a blueprint, and blueprints can be built. Chapter 2. Decide who you want to become, not just what you want to have. When most people think about the future, they immediately begin with a wish list. The car they want, the house they want, the income they want, the lifestyle they want. They imagine the external side of the future, the visible side, because it's easier to picture and easier to measure. But designing your future cannot begin with what you want to have. It must begin with who you want to become, because who you become determines everything else. Think about it. If you had everything you wanted handed to you tomorrow, the money, the opportunities, the status, the lifestyle, would you be the person capable of sustaining it? Would you have the discipline, the values, the habits, the mindset, and the emotional strength to keep it, grow it, and not sabotage it? Many don't, and that's why sudden success often collapses. They acquired the life they dreamed of, but they never became the person who could live it. Designing the future requires you to flip the script. Instead of asking, "What do I want to have?" you ask, "Who do I want to be?" Because when you build the right identity, the outcomes become easier, more natural, and more permanent. Identity drives behavior, and behavior drives results. When identity is weak or undefined, behavior becomes inconsistent, and results follow the same pattern: unpredictable, unstable, fragile. Identity-based future design also frees you from the trap of comparison. When your goals are built around belongings, achievements, and image, you easily begin competing against others. It becomes about who has more, who looks more successful, who reached the milestone faster. But when you define the future in terms of character, mastery, contribution, and growth, you stop competing with other people and start competing with your earlier self. That's a healthier race, and more importantly, a winnable race. There's another reason identity matters. Having goals without identity creates friction. Imagine someone who wants to be healthy, but still sees themselves as a person who hates exercise, or someone who wants to build wealth, but still sees themselves as someone who isn't good with money. When your identity contradicts your goals, your actions never feel natural. You have to force them, and forcing behaviors rarely lasts. But if that same person changes their identity to "I take care of my body," or "I manage money wisely," the behaviors begin to align automatically. You act like the person you believe you are. So ask yourself, in the future you truly want to build, who is the version of you that is living that future? How do they think? How do they solve problems? How do they handle stress? How do they manage their time? How do they make decisions? How do they speak about themselves? How do they treat others? How do they treat their goals? These questions shift the focus away from possessions and toward qualities, and qualities are the foundation of a sustainable future. Another important shift is moving from outcome-centered thinking to process-centered identity. Someone who says, "I want to write a book," is focused on an outcome, but someone who says, "I am a writer," is focused on identity. Someone who says, "I want to run a marathon," is focused on an outcome, but someone who says, "I am a runner," is focused on identity. The identity creates the habits, and the habits create the result. And once the identity is installed, the action becomes almost inevitable. This doesn't mean you abandon goals. Goals are important, but goals alone are not enough. Goals must be paired with identity. Goals determine direction. Identity determines consistency. Both matter, but consistency wins in the long run. Designing your future through identity also reveals a deeper truth. Becoming the right person is more valuable than acquiring the right things. Everything you acquire can be lost, stolen, or destroyed. But who you become cannot be taken away. Skills, mindset, character, discipline, resilience, confidence. These are assets that travel with you into every new season of life. That is why identity-based design produces more durable success. It builds a future you can keep. The final piece is responsibility. You cannot become someone new while clinging to the old version of yourself. You can't keep the same excuses, the same stories, the same behaviors, the same relationships, the same environments, and expect a different identity to magically appear. Identity requires alignment. It demands that you upgrade not just your vision, but your standards. You stop asking, "What can I get away with?" and start asking, "What would the future version of me expect from me today?" This is how you begin designing your future, not by aspiring to have, but by training to become. Because once you become the kind of person who can naturally attract, build, and sustain the future you want, the future no longer feels distant or impossible. It feels logical. It feels consistent. It feels like the next step in who you are becoming. And that is the strongest foundation you can build on. Chapter 3. Turn your dreams into clear future targets. Most people have dreams, big ones, small ones, vague ones, but dreams without clarity never become reality. They float around in the mind like smoke, inspiring for a moment, then disappearing just as easily. A dream might spark excitement, but without definition, it can't guide action. And action is what turns imagination into something you can actually look at, touch, or live inside of. So if you want to design your future, you must transform dreams into targets. A dream says, "Someday." A target says, "Here's when." A dream says, "I want to be successful." A target says, "I want to earn this much, build this thing, or accomplish this milestone by this date." A dream points in a general direction. A target gives you a destination, and destinations matter because the mind needs specificity in order to organize effort. Vague intentions produce vague behaviors. Clear intentions produce clear effort. Clarity is powerful for another reason. It activates the brain's natural filtration system. When something becomes specific, your brain begins noticing opportunities aligned with it. This is why when someone decides to start a business, suddenly they meet other entrepreneurs, notice relevant books, pay attention to relevant conversations, or learn about tools they had ignored before. Those things were always there, but without clarity, they were invisible. Clarity makes the invisible visible. But clarity doesn't happen on its own. You produce it. You decide what the dream looks like in practical terms. You decide what success actually means in measurable form. And the key word here is measurable. If it can't be measured, it can't be tracked. If it can't be tracked, it can't be improved. And if it can't be improved, it will most likely stay in the realm of fantasy. Turning a dream into a target requires you to define three things: the outcome, the timeline, and the plan. The outcome answers the question, what exactly do I want? The timeline answers the question, by when? And the plan answers, how will I move toward it, starting from where I am? Most people skip the most important part, which is the bridge between now and later. They either fantasize about the future or feel overwhelmed by it. But once you create steps, even imperfect steps, the future becomes less intimidating. It becomes navigable. There's another benefit to converting dreams into targets. It exposes which dreams are real and which are just fantasies you like to entertain. Some dreams only feel good to talk about, but you don't actually want to do the work required to achieve them. When you turn a dream into a target with timelines and steps, the truth reveals itself. If the dream is real, you feel energy when you define it. If it isn't, you lose interest quickly. And that's useful, because designing your future requires honesty. It's better to commit to 3 real targets than to fantasize about 15 imaginary ones. Another reason targets matter is because they create direction. Direction reduces anxiety. Think about how stressful it feels when you don't know what you're doing, where you're going, or what needs to happen next. The brain hates uncertainty. It wastes emotional energy. But once targets are set, anxiety decreases because you're no longer wandering. You have a map. You know your next step. Even if the entire path isn't visible yet, direction itself provides a psychological advantage. The fear some people have is that setting targets will make life rigid or stressful. But clarity doesn't create pressure, it creates relief. Pressure comes from indecision, from waiting, from not knowing what you're aiming at. Targets are not prisons, they're coordinates. They tell you where to aim your effort, and effort without aim is wasted. Finally, turning dreams into targets forces you to confront reality. And that's important, because reality is the material you build the future out of. You have to consider your current situation, your current resources, your current skills, your current constraints, not to discourage yourself, but to build intelligently. Designing your future doesn't mean lying to yourself. It means architecting the bridge between now and later in a way that is actually possible for you to walk. And here is the best part. Once a dream becomes a target, it stops being a fantasy and becomes a responsibility. It becomes something you are moving toward, slowly, imperfectly, consistently, instead of something you just like to imagine when you're bored. Dreams inspire, targets build. Dreams open your imagination, targets open your future. The future belongs to the person who turns imagination into direction. Chapter 4. Master the skill of long-term thinking. One of the greatest advantages you can give yourself in life is the ability to think beyond the moment. Not beyond today only, or beyond this week, but beyond the season you're currently in. Most people make decisions based on how they feel right now. They buy what feels good now. They quit when things get uncomfortable now. They delay what isn't urgent now. But the future is shaped by the decisions that look beyond the moment. The ability to think long-term is like having a second set of eyes. One set sees what is happening today. The other sees where today is taking you. Long-term thinking separates those who build a future from those who merely watch life unfold. When you think short-term, the goal is comfort, convenience, and relief. When you think long-term, the goal is progress, alignment, and investment. A short-term thinker asks, "How do I feel about this?" A long-term thinker asks, "Where does this decision lead?" Two very different questions. One keeps you stuck, the other moves you forward. Long-term thinking is not about sacrificing all enjoyment. It's about structuring your enjoyment so it doesn't sabotage your future. There's a difference between indulging occasionally and building habits that destroy your momentum. For example, sleeping in once in a while might not matter, but avoiding commitments, avoiding challenges, and avoiding responsibility will matter. Because patterns compound, and compounding is not just a financial concept, it's a behavioral one. What you do consistently, even in small doses, eventually becomes your life story. When you master long-term thinking, you begin making decisions that your future self will thank you for. You choose learning over entertainment, progress over distraction, effort over excuses, and preparation over panic. You save a portion of your income, even when buying something flashy, feels more satisfying. You take the time to build skills, even when it would be easier to rely on what you already know. You invest in relationships that have depth, even when superficial ones feel more convenient. The rewards of these decisions are not immediate, but they are significant. The challenge, however, is that long-term thinking requires patience, and patience requires faith, not blind faith, but faith in the process. You must believe that consistent action, combined with time, will produce results. Without faith in the process, impatience pushes you toward shortcuts, and shortcuts often cost more than they save. They make you feel like you're moving fast, but they usually lead to longer detours. Long-term thinking is also uncomfortable because it forces you to delay gratification, and delaying gratification is a skill very few people train. We live in a time where almost anything can be ordered, accessed, or consumed instantly. But the most valuable things, mastery, wisdom, health, wealth, strong character, meaningful relationships, have no shortcuts. They require time, repetition, discipline, and endurance. They require seasons of work that may not produce visible results right away. And that's where the short-term thinker gets discouraged. If they don't see results quickly, they assume it isn't working. The long-term thinker understands that roots grow before branches appear. Another important aspect of long-term thinking is understanding that the future is predictable when built correctly. It may not be predictable in detail, but it's predictable in direction. If you study consistently, you become smarter. If you exercise consistently, you become healthier. If you save consistently, you become financially stronger. If you reflect consistently, you become wiser. These outcomes are not mysteries. They are natural consequences. Long-term thinking isn't about guessing. It's about aligning cause and effect over time. One more advantage of long-term thinking is that it protects you from being manipulated by urgency. When you don't have a long-term vision, everything that feels urgent becomes important. Every distraction feels like an obligation. Every inconvenience feels like a crisis. But when you know where you're headed, you can say no without guilt. You can filter without hesitation. You can prioritize without confusion. This alone gives you power in a world filled with noise. Mastering long-term thinking doesn't require extraordinary intelligence. It requires awareness, discipline, and perspective. It requires asking better questions, like what will this cost me in 5 years? Or what will this decision make possible for me later? Or what is the long-term reward hiding behind the short-term discomfort? These questions shift how you operate. They shift how you build. They shift how you live. If you want to design a meaningful future, you must train yourself to think beyond the season you're in, because the future belongs to the person who plants trees, whose shade they may not sit under for a while, but whose fruits they will eventually enjoy. Chapter 5. Design a vision you can commit to. A future that is vague will never hold your commitment. A future that is borrowed from someone else's expectations will never feel worth the effort, and a future that isn't personal will never survive discomfort. This is why designing a compelling vision is one of the most important parts of shaping the life you want. A vision is not just a description of tomorrow, it is a reason to show up today. It gives your effort a purpose, your discipline a direction, and your sacrifices a meaning. Most people skip this step because it feels abstract. They say things like, "I just want to be successful," or "I just want to be happy," or "I just want a better life." But these statements are not visions. They're placeholders. They don't tell you what kind of success, what kind of happiness, or what version of a better life you want. Without specificity, the brain cannot commit. It cannot engage. It cannot get behind the mission fully. When the vision is unclear, effort becomes inconsistent. You make progress when you feel motivated, and pause when you don't. But when a vision is clear and deeply personal, it keeps you moving, even when motivation is nowhere to be found. Designing a vision also requires honesty about what you truly want, not what sounds impressive or acceptable. A lot of visions die because they are built for approval instead of meaning. You don't need the world to agree with your vision for it to be valid. You just need to be willing to live with it. In fact, some of the most powerful visions look unreasonable, unrealistic, or eccentric to others at first. That's fine. They don't have to carry your dream. They don't have to wake up early for it. They don't have to invest years for it. You do. Another reason vision matters is because it gives structure to sacrifice. Every meaningful future requires trade-offs, whether in time, comfort, ego, habits, or old patterns. When you don't have a vision, every sacrifice feels painful. But when you do have one, the same sacrifice feels purposeful. Waking up early feels different when it's connected to something bigger. Learning a difficult skill feels different when you know what it unlocks. Saying no to distractions feels different when you know what you're protecting. Vision doesn't eliminate discomfort, it gives discomfort meaning, and meaning makes discomfort bearable. But a good vision cannot just be exciting. It must also be achievable through consistent action. That doesn't mean it has to be small, it just means it has to be buildable. Some people create visions that sound impressive, but lack a path. They imagine the final destination without imagining the steps between here and there. The vision might be thrilling, but if the brain cannot see a bridge, commitment collapses. A powerful vision sits at the intersection of desire and practicality. It should be big enough to stretch you, but real enough to build. To design a vision you can commit to, ask yourself a few important questions. What would make my life meaningful? What outcomes would excite me enough to work through discomfort? If no one judged me, what would I choose? What future would I regret not pursuing? Questions like these remove the noise. They reveal what you actually want instead of what you're supposed to want. When you get closer to your vision, you may notice two things happening. First, the vision becomes simpler, not in the sense of smaller, but in the sense of clearer. Complexity fades and essentials remain. Second, the vision becomes more personal. It begins to reflect your values, not just your ambitions. A vision that aligns with your values is far easier to sustain because values endure through time, while motivations fluctuate. Finally, a vision needs to be written down and reviewed regularly. A vision that only lives in your mind is too easy to forget, distort, or ignore. Writing it down makes it tangible. Reviewing it keeps it alive. You don't have to read it every day, but you do need to return to it often enough that it shapes your decisions. A good vision whispers in your ear when you are tempted to drift. It reminds you who you are becoming and what you are building. In the end, designing a vision you can commit to is not about predicting the future perfectly. It's about choosing a direction that is worth the journey. When you have that, commitment becomes a natural response. You don't have to force yourself to care. You care because the future you're designing is too meaningful to abandon. Chapter 6. Break down the future into practical milestones. The future becomes manageable the moment you divide it into pieces. Big goals overwhelm people, not because they are impossible, but because they are undefined. When all you can see is the distance between where you are and where you want to be, discouragement is natural. The mind needs smaller units to track progress, maintain belief, and adjust course. That's why breaking the future into milestones is such a critical part of designing your life. It transforms a dream into a sequence, and sequences are buildable. Think of milestones as checkpoints on a long highway. You don't reach the final city in one giant leap. You pass through towns, exits, and markers along the way. Each one confirms that you're moving in the right direction and gives you feedback about pace, effort, and strategy. Without checkpoints, you might still be progressing, but you'd never know it, and the lack of visible progress can kill motivation. Human beings don't just need progress, they need to see it. Milestones also force clarity. When you break things down, ambiguity disappears. Saying, "I want to be healthier" is vague. Breaking it down into "I will improve my cardio endurance, increase my strength, and lower my resting heart rate over the next 12 months is clearer. Breaking it down further to "I'll run 3 times a week, strength train twice a week, and track my metrics monthly" is even clearer. Each layer makes the future more actionable, and the more actionable it is, the more likely it becomes. A useful milestone has 3 qualities. It is visible, measurable, and time-specific. If you cannot see the milestone, you can't recognize completion. If you cannot measure it, you can't adjust. And if you cannot time it, you can't commit. This applies to financial goals, health goals, skill-building goals, relationship goals, and personal development aims. It applies to careers, businesses, education, and even character. Milestones make the abstract concrete. Breaking down the future also reveals whether your timeline is realistic. Many people dramatically underestimate how long meaningful change takes. They assume progress should be fast, immediate, and linear. But progress in most areas is slow, invisible at first, then exponential later. When you break down a goal into milestones, you gain a more honest view of how time interacts with effort. This honesty prevents impulsiveness and helps you stay in the game long enough to see results that other people quit before reaching. Milestones are also valuable for psychological reasons. When the brain experiences too many losses, it shuts down. When it experiences wins, it opens. A milestone is a manageable win. It feeds belief. It reinforces identity. It proves that the plan is working, even if the final destination is still far away. Belief is not something you just have. It is something you earn through evidence. Milestones produce evidence. However, it's important to recognize that milestones are not just about speed, they're about direction. A milestone can show you if something is failing too, and that is just as valuable. If you set a 3-month milestone and you miss it completely, that isn't an excuse to quit. It's a signal to adjust. Maybe the method was wrong. Maybe the timeline was too optimistic. Maybe the environment needs to change. Maybe the effort wasn't consistent. Milestones create feedback loops, and feedback loops protect you from drifting blindly. There is also a deeper benefit. Milestones teach discipline. When you commit to small steps, you train yourself to honor your plan. You stop relying on being in the mood or motivated. Motivation may start the journey, but discipline sustains it. Discipline is built through repetition, and milestones give repetition a home. You don't just do the work, you do the work for a purpose, toward a checkpoint, under a timeline. That structure builds internal strength. Finally, milestones reduce fear. Big futures are intimidating. Big visions feel heavy. Big goals make doubt louder. But when you break the future into chunks, you shrink the fear. Instead of asking, "Can I build this entire thing?" you ask, "Can I complete this next milestone?" And the answer is almost always yes. And if you can complete the next milestone, and the next, and the next, eventually the future you once feared becomes the future you are living. This is the practical art of future design, making tomorrow granular enough to work on today. Milestones turn the distant into the doable, the overwhelming into the attainable, and the imagined into the inevitable. Chapter 7. Use systems, not willpower. Most people overestimate willpower and underestimate systems. They think the key to building their future is to try harder, stay motivated, or force themselves into discipline. But willpower is a weak foundation for a long journey. It's inconsistent, unreliable, and heavily affected by mood, stress, energy, environment, and emotion. Systems, on the other hand, are steady. Systems don't ask if you feel like doing the work. They make the work part of the structure of your life. Think about it this way: if you need motivation every time you want to do something important, you'll only make progress on the days when conditions are perfect. But life rarely gives you perfect days. This is why so many dreams stall after the initial excitement fades. The problem is not a lack of desire. The problem is a lack of systems to support the desire. A dream without a system becomes a burden. A dream with a system becomes a process. A system is simply a reliable method for getting consistent results with less mental tension. It transforms recurring decisions into routines, and routines into automatic behavior. For example, deciding to exercise every day is not a system, it's a goal. Scheduling workouts at a specific time, preparing gym clothes in advance, arranging your training plan, and tracking your sessions is a system. The system reduces friction. Less friction means more consistency. The greatest benefit of systems is that they reduce decision fatigue. Every time you have to decide whether or not to work, you burn mental energy. And decision fatigue is one of the main reasons people procrastinate. When the decision is already made through a system such as a set schedule, a checklist, a habit trigger, or an environment that cues action, there's nothing to debate. You simply follow the structure. The mind saves energy. The task gets done. This doesn't mean motivation is useless. Motivation is fuel for the beginning. It sparks momentum, but systems are what carry you through the long, unglamorous middle. Systems convert bursts of effort into sustained progress. Without systems, motivation turns into a cycle of excitement followed by frustration. With systems, motivation turns into a cycle of progress followed by belief. Another reason systems matter is because they protect you from emotional swings. When you rely on willpower, bad days become excuses. I'm tired. I'm stressed. I'm not in the mood. I'll do it later. These are the traps that destroy consistency. Systems don't care about mood. They care about execution, and execution builds momentum. Momentum builds identity. Identity builds the future. Systems also help you track and measure progress, which is important because progress is rarely felt in the moment. You don't always feel smarter while learning, or stronger while training, or wealthier while saving, or wiser while reflecting. Progress feels slow. Systems reveal it through measurement. When you see improvement, even small improvement, belief increases. Belief fuels patience, and patience protects the future. A powerful system also considers environment. Environment is stronger than willpower. If your environment constantly tempts you toward distraction, comfort, gossip, consumption, or ease, then even strong intentions will eventually collapse. But if your environment nudges you toward action, growth, and habit, then even weak motivation can produce impressive results. This is why people who want to get fit change their food environment, why people who want to save money automate finances, and why people who want to learn surround themselves with teachers or books. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you rise to the level of your systems, and you fall to the level of your environment. Systems also make failure less dramatic. When you rely on willpower, one bad day feels like a collapse. When you operate through systems, a bad day is just part of the process. You don't quit, you reset, you continue. Systems normalize imperfection, and imperfection is part of every meaningful achievement. The final advantage of systems is scalability. Willpower doesn't scale because it depends on you being strong all the time. Systems scale because they don't depend on strength, they depend on structure. When your future expands, Systems evolve with it. You can refine them, upgrade them, outsource parts of them, automate portions of them, and leverage tools to amplify them. A person who uses willpower will always struggle. A person who uses systems will always progress. The future belongs to those who build frameworks that make success the default, not a lucky streak of motivation. Designing your future means designing the systems that make that future inevitable. Where willpower tries to push you forward, systems pull you forward, and being pulled is always easier than pushing. Chapter 8. Engineer your environment for success. Your environment will always influence you more than you influence it. Most people underestimate this truth. They assume they are purely driven by personal choice, personal strength, and personal intention. But the science of behavior and the history of achievement both reveal a consistent pattern. Environment shapes action, and action shapes destiny. If you want to design your future, you must design the environment that your future will grow out of. Nothing thrives in the wrong environment. Not plants, not ideas, not habits, not dreams. Think about how much of your behavior is automatic. You reach for your phone without thinking. You check notifications without deciding. You eat when food is near. You procrastinate when distractions are visible. You consume what is placed in front of you. These are not moral failures. They are environmental cues. The brain responds to what is easy, available, familiar, and nearby. If the environment encourages distraction, distraction becomes the default. If the environment encourages focus, focus becomes the default. Environment is not neutral. It either supports your future or undermines it. When people rely solely on discipline, they inevitably burn out. Discipline is important, but discipline without environment is like trying to swim with weights strapped to your legs. You may move forward for a while, but you will wear yourself out. The goal is not to become someone with superhuman willpower. The goal is to build an environment where the right behaviors become easier and the wrong ones become harder. When effort aligns with environment, consistency becomes natural. Designing a supportive environment begins with removing friction. Friction is anything that makes positive action harder than necessary. If you want to read more, for example, having books hidden away in a drawer adds friction. Keeping a book on your desk or by your bed removes it. If you want to exercise in the morning, placing your clothes out the night before removes friction. If you want to save money, putting your savings on autopilot removes friction. Friction is subtle, but powerful. A tiny barrier can kill a great habit. Removing that barrier can make a great habit feel effortless. The opposite is also true. Adding friction to negative behaviors weakens their grip. If you want to reduce social media time, removing apps from your home screen adds friction. If you want to stop impulse shopping, removing saved payment methods adds friction. If you want to reduce late-night snacking, not bringing junk food into the house adds friction. Most people don't realize their bad habits are not fueled by deep desire. They are fueled by convenience. Environment also includes people. The individuals you regularly interact with play a massive role in shaping your standards. Standards are contagious. If you spend time with people who settle, you will eventually settle. If you spend time with people who improve, you will eventually improve. The people around you either normalize excuses or normalize progress. They either celebrate growth or resent it. They either encourage your future or anchor you to your past. Designing your future requires designing your circle, not out of arrogance, but out of responsibility. There's another aspect of environment that is often ignored: informational environment. What you consume forms your worldview. Your worldview forms your expectations. Your expectations form your decisions, and your decisions form your future. If your informational environment is filled with pessimism, outrage, gossip, and chaos, your mindset will be shaped by fear and distraction. If it is filled with learning, strategy, wisdom, and examples of possibility, your mindset will be shaped by potential. You cannot consistently think about growth if you constantly consume noise. Your physical environment matters too. The spaces you work in, the spaces you relax in, and the spaces you sleep in all influence performance. A cluttered space creates mental clutter. A chaotic room creates chaotic energy. A workspace filled with distractions kills deep work. On the other hand, a clean, organized, intentional environment prepares the mind for clarity. It signals that this is a space for doing something meaningful. Finally, designing your environment is not a one-time event. It's a system you refine over time. As your goals evolve, your environment must evolve with them. What was once supportive can become restrictive. What once pushed you forward can later hold you back. Part of future design is regularly asking, does my environment reflect the future I am trying to build? If the answer is no, don't blame yourself. Adjust the environment. A great future is not built by relying on willpower alone. It is built by creating a world where your desired behaviors are the easiest behaviors. When environment and vision align, success feels natural instead of forced. Chapter 9. Build daily routines that compound over time. If there's one secret that quietly shapes extraordinary futures, it's the power of daily routines. Not big dramatic transformations, not once-in-a-lifetime breakthroughs, but simple repeated behaviors that compound over months and years. Most people dramatically overestimate what they can accomplish in a week and underestimate what they can accomplish in 5 years. The reason is simple: they chase intensity instead of consistency. Intensity feels exciting, but consistency is what builds results. And consistency lives in routines. A routine is not just a schedule, it's a rhythm, a predictable pattern that makes progress automatic. When you don't have routines, every day becomes a negotiation with yourself. You ask, should I do this today? Do I feel like it? Maybe I'll start later. That negotiation drains mental energy and often ends in delay or avoidance. But when routines are established, there is no negotiation. You just follow the rhythm. The work happens because it's embedded into your lifestyle. The beauty of routines is that they don't need to be extreme to be effective. Small routines produce large returns when repeated over long stretches of time. Reading 10 pages a day doesn't feel like much, but 10 pages a day becomes 3,650 pages a year, which is around 15 average books. Saving a small percentage of your income might feel slow, but over a decade it becomes security, opportunity, and leverage. Practicing a skill for 30 minutes a day may feel insignificant, but it compounds into mastery, while others remain stuck at the beginner level. The math of habits is simple but unforgiving. The compounding curve rewards the consistent and punishes the inconsistent. Designing future-focused routines begins with identifying the behaviors that actually move the needle in your life. Not every habit has equal weight. Some habits are foundational, like sleep, learning, financial control, health, deep work, planning, and reflection. These habits create the conditions for every other upgrade. When these foundations are weak, everything else becomes fragile. When they are strong, everything else becomes easier. Another key to building routines that last is simplicity. Over-engineered routines collapse quickly. Too much complexity turns a routine into a burden. The brain resists burdens. It cooperates with simplicity. If you want a routine to last, make it easy to begin and hard to avoid. For example, if you want to journal in the morning, keep the journal on your desk, not hidden in a drawer. If you want to practice a language, keep the app on your home screen. If you want to exercise daily, pick a realistic duration first, then scale intensity later. Successful routines grow over time. They don't start finished. One mistake many people make is trying to build routines through motivation. Motivation is helpful to start, but useless to maintain. Routines must survive low-energy days, busy seasons, emotional dips, and periods of doubt. That means the routine must be sustainable, even when you are not operating at your best. A good routine adapts to real life. It has a minimum viable version for tough days, and a full version for normal days. The minimum version keeps the streak alive, which protects identity. Identity then protects consistency. Tracking routines is also a powerful accelerator. What you measure, you improve. Tracking provides visibility, and visibility produces progress. When you can see how many days you practiced, studied, trained, saved or executed, it reinforces belief. It turns progress into evidence. Evidence builds confidence, and confidence fuels patience, the ingredient that most people lack in their pursuit of long-term success. Another important truth is that routines don't just build skills, they build identity. When you read daily, you begin seeing yourself as someone who learns. When you train daily, you begin seeing yourself as someone who cares about strength and health. When you work consistently on your craft, you begin seeing yourself as a creator, instead of merely a dreamer. Identity makes future behavior easier. You act in alignment with who you believe you are. Finally, daily routines protect you from chaos. The world is full of noise, distractions, interruptions, temptations, and demands. Without routines, you get pulled in every direction. With routines, you anchor yourself. You create stability. You gain ground even when life is turbulent. The future belongs to those who treat consistency as a superpower, not because they are special, but because they understand compounding. The difference between a life that drifts and a life that is designed often comes down to what happens daily. Not occasionally, not someday. Daily. Small wins, stacked quietly, become big wins later. That is how the future is built. Through routines that compound. Chapter 10. Replace excuses with personal responsibility. One of the greatest turning points in designing your future happens the moment you stop negotiating with excuses and start taking ownership of your life. Nothing changes permanently until responsibility enters the picture. Excuses might feel comforting in the moment, but they are destructive in the long run. They temporarily protect your ego while permanently limiting your future. Responsibility, on the other hand, can feel uncomfortable at first, but it gives you power because you cannot change what you refuse to own. Excuses come in many forms. Some are obvious, like "I don't have time," "I'm too tired," or "it's too difficult." Others are more sophisticated, disguised as rational explanations. "Now isn't the right season," "I'm waiting for the perfect moment," or "once things calm down, then I'll start." And some are wrapped in blame. "My parents should have," "My boss never," "The system won't," "People like me don't get opportunities." The problem with all these narratives is not that they are never partially true, it's that they place control somewhere outside of you. And when control lives outside of you, the future does too. Personal responsibility is not about ignoring obstacles, it's about acknowledging obstacles without giving them authority over your direction. Responsibility says, "I may not have chosen the starting point, but I will choose the path forward." Responsibility says, "I cannot control everything, but I can control my effort, my standards, my learning, and my response." That mindset is the dividing line between those who design their future and those who merely react to it. When you adopt responsibility, something powerful happens. Excuses lose credibility. They stop sounding convincing even to yourself. You begin recognizing how excuses shrink your potential and distort your timeline. You start hearing the difference between reasons and rationalizations. Reasons describe reality. Rationalizations defend comfort, and comfort is often the enemy of progress. One of the most common excuses people use is lack of time. But the truth is not a lack of time, it is a lack of priority. You always make time for what you truly value. You might not admit that value consciously, but your schedule reveals it. If entertainment gets more time than growth, then entertainment is the priority. If scrolling gets more time than learning, scrolling is the priority. Responsibility forces you to confront this truth. It's uncomfortable, but it's liberating. Because once you acknowledge that time is allocated, not magically given, you regain the ability to reallocate it. Another popular excuse is lack of confidence, the fear of not being good enough, skilled enough, smart enough, or ready enough. But confidence isn't something you wait for. It's something you build. Confidence is the reward for showing up repeatedly, not the prerequisite. The longer you wait to feel ready, the further the future drifts away. Responsibility interrupts that cycle by saying, readiness is created through participation, not hesitation. Personal responsibility also transforms how you view failure. Without responsibility, failure becomes proof that you should quit. With responsibility, failure becomes information you can use. You start asking better questions. What can I learn from this? What needs to change? What skill am I missing? What would make this easier next time? When failure becomes feedback, growth accelerates. When failure becomes shame, growth stops. Taking responsibility also reduces envy and comparison. Envy thrives on the belief that other people got their future through luck, privilege, or shortcuts. But once you take responsibility, you focus less on what others have and more on what you are building. Responsibility shifts the attention from complaining to constructing. It's the difference between being a critic and being a creator. Critics react to the world, creators design it. One of the deepest forms of responsibility is emotional responsibility, recognizing that you cannot build a meaningful future if you outsource your happiness, your peace, or your self-worth to other people. When you blame others for how you feel, you give them the steering wheel of your life. Responsibility takes it back. It says, my reactions are mine to manage. This doesn't mean you suppress emotions. It means you develop the strength to not let emotions dictate your trajectory. Of course, responsibility doesn't mean doing everything alone. It doesn't reject support, guidance, or mentorship. It simply means you don't delegate ownership of your life to other people. Help is useful. Dependency is not. The future rewards those who seek resources and build capacity, not those who wait to be saved. Excuses comfort you today, but cost you tomorrow. Responsibility might challenge you today, but rewards you tomorrow. When you remove excuses, you remove the ceiling. When you take responsibility, you take the wheel. This shift doesn't just change your behavior, it changes your identity. You stop living as a victim of circumstances and start living as a designer of outcomes. And the designer always has more power than the victim. In future design, responsibility is not optional, it is the foundation. Because the moment you accept responsibility for your life, you gain something priceless, the right to change it. Chapter 11. Remove distractions and build laser focus. A well-designed future requires attention, and attention is one of the rarest currencies in the modern world. We live in a time where distractions have multiplied, convenience has become addictive, and noise has replaced clarity. The problem is not that distractions exist, Distractions have always existed. The problem is that most people have never been trained to protect their attention. They allow anything loud, urgent, or entertaining to hijack their mind. A future cannot be built that way. The future belongs to the person who learns to direct their attention instead of surrendering it. Distraction is often misunderstood. People think distraction is simply entertainment or scrolling or procrastination. But distraction is anything that pulls you away from what truly matters: your growth, your goals, your learning, your health, your relationships, your purpose. Distraction can even look productive. Sometimes people do the easy productive thing to avoid doing the meaningful productive thing. They clean their desks instead of writing the proposal. They answer emails instead of making the difficult call. They organize files instead of working on their business. These are disguised distractions, the most dangerous kind because they feel responsible while accomplishing nothing essential. Distraction thrives on immediacy. It offers quick stimulation and instant reward. Focus, on the other hand, offers delayed reward and long-term satisfaction. The brain naturally gravitates toward immediacy unless it is trained otherwise. This is why building focus is not just about removing distraction. It's also about strengthening your tolerance for boredom and depth. Boredom is not your enemy. It is the threshold before deep work. If you cannot sit through the initial discomfort of stillness, you cannot enter the state where high-value thinking and creativity happen. Protecting your attention starts with awareness. You must know what is currently stealing your focus. For some, it's digital noise, endless notifications, endless scrolling, endless media consumption. For others, it's social noise, constant opinions, unnecessary drama, conversations that drain energy instead of fueling progress. For others, it's internal noise, anxiety, self-doubt, worry, rumination. And for many, it's environmental noise, cluttered spaces, chaotic routines, or people who force urgency into every interaction. You cannot change what you refuse to identify. Once you know where your attention leaks, the next step is designing boundaries. Boundaries are not about restriction, they are about protection. You create boundaries to protect the future you are building. Sometimes that involves limiting screen time, turning off notifications, or creating tech-free zones. Sometimes it means scheduling blocks of uninterrupted work. Sometimes it means redefining who gets access to you and when. Sometimes it means learning to say no without guilt. Your no protects your yes, and your yes determines your future. Building focus also requires you to reclaim time. A great deal of distraction is not caused by the lack of time, but by the mismanagement of time. When your day is unstructured, the world will structure it for you. You wake up reacting instead of initiating. You end the day feeling busy instead of productive. But when you decide what matters, assign time to it, and show up consistently, you regain control. The future is built during the hours that most people waste without realizing it. Another skill in focus building is monotasking, doing one thing at a time. Multitasking is celebrated in modern culture, but it is extremely inefficient. The brain does not actually multitask, it switches rapidly between tasks, losing momentum each time. This switching reduces quality, increases errors, and exhausts mental energy. Deep focus on one task produces far better results in far less time. The individuals who master deep work don't just work harder, they work smarter. But focusing on the right things also requires eliminating the wrong ambitions. You cannot build everything at once. You cannot chase every opportunity. You cannot pursue every path. Designing your future means deciding what you will pursue and what you will ignore. Focus is not just about attention, it's about direction. A laser is powerful because it directs energy into a single point. A scattered beam lights the room, but a laser cuts through steel. Finally, building focus is not about perfection, it's about improvement. No one is perfectly focused all the time. The key is to shorten the gap between distraction and return. If you get distracted for an hour, bring it back. If you drift for a day, bring it back. If you lose a week, bring it back. The future belongs to the person who keeps returning to what matters. Focus is a habit, attention is a skill, and when you master them, your future becomes something you shape with intention instead of something that happens by accident. Chapter 12. Turn failures into feedback loops. If you're going to design your future, you need a new relationship with failure. Not the emotional version you inherited from school, not the shame-based version you absorbed from society, and not the perfectionist version that demands flawless execution. You need a practical, strategic, growth-driven relationship with failure. Because failure is not the enemy of progress, it is the data that fuels it. Without feedback, improvement is impossible. Without improvement, the future stays out of reach. When most people fail, they interpret it as a statement about their identity. I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. This isn't meant for me. I guess I'm not someone who can do this. But failure doesn't speak about identity. It speaks about approach. It speaks about timing, strategy, skill, preparation, and consistency. Failure is information, not condemnation. Once you understand that, a door opens. You stop taking failure personally and start using it professionally. The reason failure feels so painful is not because of the event itself, but because of the meaning we attach to it. When someone assumes failure means stop, they fail once and then never try again. When someone assumes it means change direction, they pivot too quickly, abandoning paths that actually needed time and repetition. But when someone assumes failure means collect feedback, they extract the lesson, upgrade the system, and continue. That's how mastery emerges. Mastery is built on thousands of small feedback loops, not one perfect performance. One of the most important skills in future design is separating outcome from interpretation. The outcome is what happened. The interpretation is what you tell yourself about what happened. If you lose money in a business, that's an outcome. If you conclude I'm not meant to be an entrepreneur, that's an interpretation. If someone rejects your work, that's an outcome. If you conclude I'm not creative, that's an interpretation. Outcomes are neutral. Interpretations define your future. Change the interpretation, and the same failure becomes fuel instead of a funeral. Another key piece in transforming failure into feedback is analysis. Asking the right questions turns confusion into clarity. Questions like, what part of the plan worked? What part didn't work? What was missing? What did I assume incorrectly? What would I do differently with the same resources? These questions develop strategy. They make failure useful. People who never analyze failure repeat failure. People who analyze failure convert failure. Those who convert failure eventually achieve outcomes that others once labeled impossible. But feedback loops don't just reveal mistakes, they reveal timing. Some things fail not because they are wrong, but because they are early. Predicting timing is one of the hardest parts of building anything meaningful. You may launch a project before the market is ready, pursue a skill before the opportunity window appears, or make a move before you have the leverage to sustain it. Without feedback loops, you assume it was the wrong path. With feedback loops, you refine the timing and try again, not blindly, but strategically. Turning failure into feedback also protects confidence. Most people think confidence comes from successful results, but real confidence comes from durable identity. If you only feel confident when you win, your confidence is fragile. It collapses under pressure. But if you feel confident in your ability to learn, adjust, and adapt, then failure doesn't threaten you. It informs you. And when failure becomes information, fear loses its power. Fear is always strongest in the presence of uncertainty. Feedback reduces uncertainty. Another powerful idea: failure compresses learning. There are lessons that take years to learn through theory, and lessons that take days to learn through failure. Failure accelerates wisdom. It cuts through fantasy and exposes reality. And reality is essential for future design. You do not build the future you want with illusions. You build it with an honest understanding of what works and what doesn't. Finally, feedback loops create resilience. Not resilience born from toughness alone, but resilience born from competence. When you know how to analyze failure, adjust your plan, and progress forward, you become harder to stop. Obstacles don't scare you. Setbacks don't break you. Challenges don't discourage you. You know how to recover. And recovery is one of the most underrated competitive advantages in life. Most people don't lose because they fail. They lose because they stop after failing. And stopping is always a choice. Designing your future doesn't mean eliminating failure. It means integrating failure. It means expecting failure, using failure, and benefiting from failure. When failure becomes feedback, and feedback becomes improvement, and improvement becomes competence, and competence becomes confidence, then the future becomes something you can actually build. Chapter 13. Recruit the right allies into your future. No one builds a meaningful future alone. Even the most independent people, the most disciplined performers, the most resilient achievers have allies, mentors, peers, partners, supporters, and environments that reinforce their direction. The myth of the self-made individual is appealing, but incomplete. Yes, you must take responsibility for your life. Yes, you must drive your own growth. But shaping your future also requires selecting the right people to walk with you. The wrong people can destroy your momentum. The right people can multiply it. When you begin designing your future, one of the first shifts that happens is relational. You stop tolerating relationships that keep you anchored to your past, and you start seeking relationships that align with your future. This can be uncomfortable. It can feel disloyal. It can even feel lonely at first. But loneliness is temporary. Stagnation is permanent. You are not abandoning people out of arrogance. You are choosing yourself out of responsibility. Future-shaping relationships fall into a few categories. There are mentors and teachers, people ahead of you who provide wisdom, structure, and perspective. There are peers, people beside you who share the journey, exchange ideas, and normalize growth. And there are supporters, people who believe in you even when your results are not visible yet. Each category matters. Mentors shorten your learning curve. Peers increase your standards. Supporters fuel your courage. One of the most underestimated benefits of allies is the power of mirroring. Human beings naturally mirror the expectations of the groups they belong to. When you surround yourself with people who treat improvement as normal, excellence as standard, and growth as expected, you rise, not through force, but through alignment. You don't want to disappoint the room you're in, so you elevate. But when you surround yourself with people who normalize excuses, complain about everything, and avoid responsibility, you lower your standards to match the environment. The group always influences the individual more than the individual influences the group. Future allies also correct blind spots. Every individual, no matter how intelligent or introspective, has blind spots, biases, fears, habits, assumptions, or weaknesses that they cannot see from inside their own mind. The right ally sees what you miss and speaks up without shrinking from discomfort. They are honest without cruelty, direct without arrogance, helpful without patronizing, and they don't just point out flaws, they offer perspective. They help you course correct without shame. However, having allies doesn't just mean surrounding yourself with positive people. It means surrounding yourself with aligned people. Someone can be supportive of you as a person, but completely unsupportive of your future. They don't want you to suffer, but they also don't want you to outgrow them. They can love you deeply and still limit you unconsciously. Designing your future requires you to distinguish between emotional alignment and future alignment. Both matter, but only one moves you forward. Another factor to consider is that allies change as you evolve. The people who helped you at level the 1st of May, not be the people who can help you at level 5. This isn't betrayal, it's progression. You don't owe your future to the version of yourself that existed before you knew better. With every upgrade in vision, skills and identity, your relational ecosystem upgrades too. You don't force this, you allow it. And you remain grateful for every season, even the ones that end. Recruiting allies also means learning to ask for help. Asking for help is not weakness, it is intelligence. Weakness is pretending you don't need anyone. Intelligence is recognizing that collaboration multiplies capacity. Every great builder, creator, entrepreneur, leader, or achiever has leveraged guidance, expertise and support. They didn't wait to acquire every skill before starting. They built momentum by leaning on those who already mastered certain skills. And just as you recruit allies, you must also be one. The future is not just shaped by what you receive, it is shaped by what you contribute. When you become a person who uplifts, encourages, challenges, listens, supports, and helps others grow, you attract people who do the same. The world tends to mirror what you offer. If you offer competition, you attract rivals. If you offer gossip, you attract drama. If you offer growth, you attract builders. Finally, remember this: your future demands a different environment than your past, and environments are built through people. When you choose allies with intention, growth becomes lighter, faster, and richer. You stop walking alone, and you start walking in formation, and a formation is harder to stop than an individual. The future becomes easier to design when you are not carrying it alone. Chapter 14. Build character that can handle the future you want. It's one thing to imagine a compelling future. It's another thing to become the kind of person who can actually live inside it. This is where many people overlook one of the most critical components of future design: character. Character is not about image or reputation. It is about the internal architecture that determines how you behave when no one is watching, how you respond when things don't go your way, and how you remain grounded when success arrives. A future built on vision alone collapses. A future built on character endures. Character becomes essential because every meaningful future comes with tests. If you want to achieve something significant, life will give you pressure. Pressure tests your patience, your discipline, your resilience, your honesty, and your humility. It tests whether you can stay committed when the early excitement fades. It tests whether you can keep learning when you're already good. It tests whether you can stay grounded when people praise you and stay persistent when people doubt you. Without developed character, these tests choke progress. With developed character, these tests become gateways. Most people assume the biggest risk to their future is failure, but in reality, the bigger risk might be success. Success without character is dangerous. It can make you arrogant, complacent, impulsive, or blind to reality. It can make you sabotage relationships, neglect your health, ignore feedback, or believe your own hype. Many promising futures have been destroyed, not by lack of talent or opportunity, but by lack of character. Talent takes you up, character keeps you up. So what does it mean to build character for the future? It means cultivating the virtues and capacities that your future will require. For example, if your future demands leadership, you must develop responsibility, communication, empathy, and decisiveness. If your future demands entrepreneurship, you must develop resilience, discipline, humility, and courage. If your future demands mastery, you must develop patience, focus, and consistency. Futures are not built through wishful thinking, they are built through compatibility. You must become compatible with the future you desire. One of the most overlooked traits of character is patience. Patience is not passivity, it is the ability to delay gratification, tolerate slow progress, and continue investing when results have not yet arrived. Impatient people destroy their own futures because they quit too early, demand outcomes too quickly, or panic under temporary discomfort. The bigger the future you're building, the more patience it requires. Short-term thinkers chase dopamine. Long-term thinkers cultivate discipline. Another foundational trait is humility. Humility keeps you learning, and learning keeps you improving. Without humility, you reject feedback, ignore lessons, overestimate your ability, and underestimate the challenges ahead. Humility does not make you weak. It makes you adaptable. It keeps the door to growth open. It protects you from stagnation. The moment you believe you have arrived, you begin to decline. Character also demands courage, not the dramatic, heroic kind seen in movies, but the quiet kind that shows up in everyday decisions. The courage to start before you feel ready. The courage to say no when others pressure you. The courage to stand alone when values conflict. The courage to fail publicly without collapsing internally. The courage to keep going after disappointment. This kind of courage is not loud, but it is transformative. Discipline is another pillar, and discipline is often misunderstood. Discipline is not about being harsh with yourself. It's about being loyal to your future. It's choosing what you want most over what you want now. It's acting according to strategy instead of emotion. Discipline gives structure to aspiration. Without discipline, desire remains fantasy. Finally, character requires integrity. Integrity doesn't just mean honesty. It means wholeness. It means your actions, values, and goals are aligned. When people pursue a future that contradicts their values, internal conflict appears. It becomes exhausting, confusing, and unsustainable. But when your future aligns with your values, energy increases, clarity strengthens, and peace becomes part of the process. Building character is slow work. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't come with applause. There are no trophies for patience, no headlines for humility, no awards for discipline. But character quietly shapes your foundation, and when the future finally arrives, that foundation determines whether you can handle the weight. In the end, designing your future is not just about constructing plans, it's about constructing a person. The future you want will demand a version of you that is stronger, wiser, deeper, and more grounded than the version you are today. Growth is not punishment, it is preparation. And preparation is the highest form of respect you can give to the future you are building. Chapter 15. Plan for change. So life can't break your design. The future is never perfectly predictable. No amount of planning, clarity, or discipline can guarantee that life will unfold according to your script. Markets shift, people change, opportunities appear and disappear, seasons evolve, surprises arrive. This is not a flaw of life, it is a condition of life. And if you want to design a future that actually survives reality, you must plan for change rather than fear it. Flexibility is not a weakness. Flexibility is a strategic advantage. A rigid plan may look impressive on paper, but rigid plans often collapse under stress because they assume the world will cooperate. The world rarely does. Successful future designers don't resist change, they leverage it. They understand that the goal of planning is not to control life, but to create direction. The plan is the guide, not the dictator. The plan is the map, not the territory. When the terrain shifts, they adjust without abandoning the destination. Planning for change begins with adopting a mindset of adaptation. Adaptation doesn't mean lowering your standards or abandoning your goals. It means being willing to modify paths, update strategies, and adjust timelines without surrendering the vision. Some people mistake flexibility for indecision, but indecision is the absence of direction. Flexibility is the intelligent recalibration of direction. You can be unwavering about where you're going while being adaptable about how you get there. Another component of change-ready planning is building buffers. Buffers are margins, extra time, extra resources, extra skill, extra patience. When people plan without buffers, they leave no room for error. Any disruption becomes a crisis. But when buffers exist, disruptions become manageable. Financial buffers protect against emergencies. Time buffers protect against delays. Emotional buffers protect against stress. Skill buffers protect against changing conditions. Buffers don't make the journey easier, they make it survivable. Resilience is also essential. Resilience is not the ability to avoid discomfort. It is the ability to continue through discomfort. Many futures die not because the vision was wrong, but because the builder lacked endurance. There are seasons when progress is slow, opportunities stall, motivation dips, and results are invisible. In those seasons, resilience becomes more valuable than talent. Talent may start the journey, but resilience finishes it. Planning for change also means anticipating detours. Not every path is efficient. Sometimes you must go sideways before you can go forward. Sometimes you must pause before you can accelerate. Detours don't mean failure, they mean recalculation. The mistake many people make is interpreting a detour as a dead end. They stop prematurely simply because the path didn't match their expectations. But expectations are rarely accurate at the beginning of a journey. Reality always has more variables than imagination. Another powerful strategy is scenario thinking, considering multiple possibilities instead of assuming only one outcome. You can ask, what is my ideal scenario? What is a realistic scenario? What is a difficult scenario? And what would I do in each? Scenario thinking doesn't make you pessimistic, it makes you prepared. It keeps disappointment from turning into paralysis. When the unexpected happens and you already have contingencies, you don't freeze, you execute. There is also value in continuous learning. When environments change, skills must evolve. A future designed with outdated skills is a fragile future. The most successful individuals in fast-changing worlds are not the ones with the most knowledge. They are the ones with the fastest learning cycles. They don't cling to what they once knew. They update, they evolve, they remain students long after others retire into certainty. Finally, planning for change requires emotional maturity. Life will test your expectations, your patience, and sometimes your pride. There will be moments when things don't make sense, when progress feels unfairly delayed, when effort doesn't match results. Emotional maturity allows you to stay rational in those moments, instead of reacting impulsively or collapsing under frustration. You need enough emotional distance to ask, what is the lesson here, instead of declaring, why is this happening to me? The truth is, the future doesn't reward people who expect perfection. It rewards people who expect movement. It rewards those who understand that change is not a threat to their plan but a feature of the journey. If life could break your design easily, then the design wasn't strong enough to begin with. The great builders, creators, leaders and achievers in history did not succeed because everything went their way. They succeeded because they kept building while things shifted. Design your future boldly, but build it with flexibility. Set your direction with clarity, but walk with adaptability. Prepare for uncertainty, build buffers, expect detours, and continue learning. When you plan for change instead of resisting it, life loses its ability to knock you off course. You remain the designer, You remain the builder, and in the end, the future becomes something you shape not just through intention, but through resilience. Conclusion. Designing your future is not a poetic idea, it is a practical responsibility. It asks you to stop drifting, stop waiting, and stop assuming that time will magically arrange life into something meaningful. Time on its own does not organize a life. Time only passes. Design is what builds. Direction is what shapes. Discipline is what follows through. If you've reached this point, you already know that your future isn't decided by talent, luck, or inspiration alone. It is decided by clarity, systems, identity, and responsibility, the tools we've explored throughout this audiobook. You have learned that the future starts with identity, deciding who you want to become, not just what you want to acquire. You've learned that dreams must become targets, that targets must become milestones, and that milestones must live within routines. You now understand the necessity of systems that remove friction, environments that support growth, and allies that multiply strength. You recognize that excuses are expensive, that failure is information, and that focus is a currency. You've seen that character is not optional, because without character, the future collapses under its own weight. And finally, you've seen that flexibility isn't weakness, it's strategy, because a future that cannot adapt will not survive reality. The greatest mistake people make when thinking about the future is believing that it begins later. It doesn't. It begins now. Every day you make decisions that compound toward a direction, whether you choose it consciously or not. The question is not whether you are designing a future. The question is whether you are designing it with intention or leaving it to randomness. Life will gladly fill the space you refuse to fill. Distraction, convenience, and other people's agendas will design your life for you if you don't step in and become the architect. But here's the empowering truth. You don't need to see the whole staircase to begin climbing. You don't need to have every answer. You don't need the perfect conditions or the perfect plan. You just need direction, commitment, and the willingness to adjust along the way. Futures are not built through certainty, they are built through movement. The first steps are rarely glamorous. They are often quiet, repetitive, and unnoticed. But those are the steps that change everything. If there's one message to carry with you from this audiobook, let it be this: the future bends for the person who shows up consistently, not the person who dreams the loudest, or hopes the strongest, or talks the most. The person who shows up, the person who plans, the person who designs, the person who acts. You are the architect, you are the builder, you are the steward of the years ahead. Whatever season you are in right now, beginning, rebuilding, reinventing, or accelerating, the tools are now in your hands. Your future is not waiting somewhere out there. It is waiting inside your decisions. And the best time to begin designing it is today.